Hello everybody. Today we're talking about how to teach games. When I was in college, I wrote an essay about how to teach board games. And now that I'm moved on and I have my own board game event and I buy a lot of board games and I teach a lot of board games, I found myself kind of going back to that essay and using the framework of the essay that I wrote, years ago in how I teach board games. So I thought I would make a video, just kind of a tips and tricks video of how to teach board games, how I do it. This is going to be in kind of broad terms, as there are a lot of board games and there are a lot of different types of board games. But I'm hoping to just kind of have an umbrella of a good idea so that if you're watching this video, you can come up with at least a good framework. Now I have 6 different bullet points, so hopefully it'll be pretty short. But if you do them in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm hoping that you can get a good flow in whatever board game you're trying to teach. I have a few games here with me that I'm going to be referencing, holding up and talking about. But the video essentially is going to do 2 things. First, I want to talk about what factors go into a player's enjoyment of a new game, and then that'll be very brief. And then the second thing, we'll get into the actual teaching games. So let's get started. The first thing that we want to talk about, and I have my tablet here to help me out because I have my old essay up from a few years ago. So there are 3 different types, 3 different factors when players surmise the enjoyment factor of a new game experience. Number 1 is who they play the game with. This is the social environment. Some games are better with people that are more outspoken or more animated. Some aren't. Number two is how long the game actually takes to play. This is called duration. There are definitely games that are good games out there, great games, but they can overstay their welcome, so to speak. I know Agricola and Dead of Winter are all longer games that I've played. Great games, highly recommend them if you want something a little more meaty, but they can go long. And if they go a certain length, players will just go, I didn't really care for the game so much. So duration is a factor. Number 3 is the overall understanding of the rules and gameplay to the game. This is called individualized player learning curve. And this is really what we're addressing today, the third one. The rules. If they feel like, I kind of understood, the rules were taught pretty well to me, I felt like I had a good understanding of the game going into it, that can be a factor. So that's the one that we have the most control over as, the teachers of the game. And so let's get into my 6 bullet points. I'll tell you the 2 games that I'm going to be referencing during these. One is Civilization, Sid Meier's Civilization: A New Dawn by Fantasy Flight Games. And the other is Terraforming Mars by Stronghold Games, Jacob Frixelis. And so those are the 2 games that I'll probably be referencing. So let's talk about the 6 bullet points. Number 1 is give the title. Now I know this seems kind of weird. People probably see the box. They probably can read the box. In fact, you've probably said, why don't we play Terraforming Mars? I got a game called Terraforming Mars. But for some reason, to start off a teaching session by saying, all right, this is Terraforming Mars, and just repeating the name, saying the name, I don't know why, I don't know the science behind it, but it always helps ground me into going forward. And it can help players because they'll hear the title and it might trigger something with them, but I always like to just start with give the title, repeat the title. Even if you just said it a few minutes ago, right before you get into I'm going to start teaching, say, all right guys, you ready to learn? Okay, this is Terraforming Mars. Then we go into number 2. So you'll slide into number 2. And number 2 is, what is the game about? Or theme. So you would say something like, this is Terraforming Mars. In Terraforming Mars, we are corporations that are fighting against each other using government money to terraform Mars or to make Mars livable for humans. There you go. That's the theme. So basically, state the name, what's the game about? In Sid Meier's Civilization, we are all different civilizations trying to grow our civilization through art, culture, military, or science, and give the theme. What is the game about? So if you can hit those first two, and then the third one, which I'm going to get into, I'd like to hit early, and I'll tell you why in a second. The third one is, what is the overall objective or objectives? So to boil this down, how do you win? I like to put this up front, or at least towards the top, as number 3, because I've seen other people teach games and they completely space out of the objective. For some reason, I find that I've had a better response when I move the how you win the game closer to the top than get muddled in all the different mechanisms and stuff, and then say, oh yeah, the most money at the end wins, or whatever the objective is. Because when people play games for the first time, even if they're competitive or if they're not, they want to know, what am I working for? I don't want to look stupid. How do I win this game? Or what is quantified here for a decent game? So I'd like to move that up front. Give the title, give the theme, say, here's how you win. You win the game if you have the most terraforming points, or whatever, the most money at the end. Because that kind of triggers people, because everything that you say after that, they're going to be just connecting. Okay, that gives me money. That's how I win the game. Because money gives me the most points, or the most opportunity to win. Or this, if it's a point game, okay, that gives me points. If you say that up early, I think that really helps out. I think that's a good tip, to say the objective quite early on. So, number 1, give the title. Number 2, what's the game about? What is the theme? Number 3, how do I win the game? And then going into number 4, which I've called player turns. This is what I was talking about being a very blanket statement, because there's a lot of games out there with a lot of different complexity, from minimum to maximum, light games, heavy games, but this kind of is just surmised as player turns. And if you want, you could have subcategories underneath this. But I know one of the first times that I played a game years ago, someone taught it to me. I didn't even know what to do on my turn. I think I was the second player. And they're like, okay, go ahead. And I just looked down at my stuff, my cards, my board. I didn't even know what the game was. And I looked back and was like, I don't know what to do. What can I do on my turn? So I think players, right after wanting to know how to win, I think that one's first, but then after that, they don't want to look stupid. So you really got to hit number 4, player turns. And I always say, on your turn, you can do this. You can draw a card. You can play a card. You can move a person here. This is what you can do on your turn. This just helps people. It's good to hit right after the objective, because the two things that are important is, how do I win, and how do I not look stupid when it's my turn and everyone's looking at me going, it's your turn, take your turn. All right, so moving on to number 5, I've called number 5 filling in the gaps. This is kind of just a blanket statement, of course, because you've just gotten done saying what you do on your turn. Filling in the gaps is explaining some of the minor things about your turn. So for example, on your turn you can draw a card. That's what you do on your turn. Filling in the gap would be, if you draw a blue card allows you to do this. If you draw a red card, then you have to do this. Just the minor things. If you draw 2 cards, if you play a card. So 5 is basically just filling in some of the gaps. This is iconography, symbology, whatever, talking about this little cannon. If you see this little cannon on your card, it means this. Okay, so it goes basically filling in the gaps for number 5. Basically just filling out the player turn stuff. What does some of the minor stuff mean in the game? The last one, number 6, is kind of a combination of what I do. And I've learned the hard way about this. Number 6 is end of game and Q&A. End of game basically means 2 things. One that's not as important, and the other one I found to be super important. One of them is, when is the game over? So we play for 6 rounds. At the end of the 6th round, the game's over. Or we play until someone has X amount of points. Another thing that players want to know, not quite as important as how do I win and what can I do on my turn, but they also kind of want to know, like, how is the game triggered? How do we trigger the end of the game? That one not so much important. But I did find out it's quite important to explain game end scoring. If there's any scoring or bonus points people can get at the end of the game, this is where you'll want to do it. You'll want to do it by the way, at the end of the game, you can score points. If you have the most blue cards, you're going to get extra points. If you have one of every color of card, you will get some extra points. Because I've had this backfire on me. I've had it where, like, I'm not going to bother you. I'm not going to, like, slow everything down and talk about all this game end scoring. And then you have a quite savvy player who's like, if I would have known that, I would have done this and this and this, and it's blown up in my face. So I like to put it down on the list. Game end. When does the game end? And what are there for game end scores? Like, what can be scored at the end of the game, objective-wise, or personal missions, or things like that. And then the second part of this is pretty self-explanatory. Q&A. Always, always, always give a chance to say, like, does anyone have any questions? Most of the time, I'm going to be honest with you guys, most of the time, people don't, because they're kind of shy. Like, again, people don't want to look stupid. Every once in a while, you get someone that's like, I got a question. Here, this, can I ask about this? That's great. That's fine. Answer their questions. That's awesome. But most of the time, you won't. But at least as a teacher, I feel that there should be a moment for, like, does anyone have any questions? Did I go too fast? Or did you see something on a card that you're like, I don't know what this means? Or something like that. At least you give the opportunity to, because you're treating your players as human beings. You're respecting them. If they're respecting you and if they're listening and trying to learn the game and trying to do their best, give them the respect back by saying, is there anything I can help with before we start, so that you're not frustrated? And that comes in the form of Q&A. Any questions about anything? If I don't know, we can look it up in the book. So end of game and Q&A is number 6. So those are basically some just real primitive 6 points that if you just go through and learn a flow, like I've kind of done on my good days anyways, it will help you at least have a general idea how to teach games. I'll share a little bit of horror stories. I have seen some people teach games where they start by pulling out components from the box and they talk about the components, and then they pull out the cards and they talk about these cards, and it's like none of it gets put together. You got to put it together. And so another thing that I like to do, and I'm just giving tips, is repeat. If it's a short enough game, if you have to spend 20 minutes explaining a game, then just explain it and, like, let's move on. Let's just stumble through this thing. But if it doesn't take a whole lot of time to explain, if you can teach the game in 5 minutes, I like to do a quick hit them again. All 6, hit them again. So this is Terraforming Mars. Terraforming Mars, on your turn, or at least the turn stuff. On your turn, you can do this. If you draw a red card, remember you have to show us. If you draw a blue card, then you have to keep it secret. The most points wins, and the game is over when we get to the 6th round. And just kind of go back and just give a quick refresher. Someone maybe asks questions, and so people's minds are on something else. But just if you can, if it's a short enough explanation, hit them again, then say, let's play, pick a first player, and hopefully everyone will enjoy the game. You can't control all three factors that I listed, but the third one you can try to have the most control over, and that's by teaching a game in an effective way. Players will really respect you and have more fun with your game, your gaming experience, if they go into it knowing, I have a pretty good idea of what I can do. I'm not going to look stupid. I know how to win the game, and I know what I can do on my turn. And so there's a video for you, how to teach games.